Welcome to the New Year Career Clarity Workshop. Please feel free to share in the chat what brings you here and where in the world you are joining from. We have folks from Massachusetts, various parts, Georgia, Calgary, all over. Well, it's great to see you from Texas and everywhere you're joining from. So let's go ahead and dig in. If you're willing to share in the chat, just a few words about what brought you here. Why did you want to be part of this workshop? I told you it was going to be interactive. I wasn't kidding. Right out of the gate. All right, the responses are starting to roll in. Folks are interested in changing careers to focus on climate change and environment, coming from the education space, hoping to gain some clarity for your career path. Absolutely. Looking to change careers, recent graduates, looking to learn more about career path clarity. All right, well, it's wonderful to have you all here. So you might be feeling like you're at a crossroads. Maybe you don't know what you want to do in your career or how to switch to a new job that you feel really good about. You might be feeling some combination of the following: disappointed, frustrated, anxious, concerned, stuck, stressed out, burned out, confused. Let's see a yes in the chat if any of those resonate with you. Lots of yeses. We're seeing exclamation marks. We're seeing all caps. Yes. Yes to these emotions. So where can a feeling of lack of clarity come from? These are a few of the most common places. Our work once felt like a good fit, now not so much. Our role or our organization is not aligned with our values, our interests, our skills, our priorities. Maybe we don't trust our intuition and we're constantly second guessing ourselves. Maybe we've tried to make a career pivot and it hasn't worked out yet. So we're kind of questioning, well, what am I doing here? Is this really what I should be doing? So those are 4 of the most common. In the chat, if you're willing to share, put the numbers for those out of the 4 that most resonate with you. Maybe it's just one of them, maybe it's all of them. Any of that is perfectly fine. So one of you shared that all of those perfectly describe your previous situation. Yeah. And we're seeing a combination of these, that your work felt like it was a fit once upon a time, now it doesn't. We're seeing a lot of people saying that they're questioning their intuition, second guessing themselves a lot. So yeah, a lot of these are resonating with you, right? And this is based on the work that I've done with hundreds of clients and led workshops for thousands of people. And this is drawing upon the responses that you shared when you registered for this workshop. I hosted a similar event last month, and it is also informed by those conversations and the things that people shared leading up to and following that event. So these are really common, and it's perfectly understandable if you'd be experiencing any or all of these. So what do we do about it, right? So achieving career clarity calls for slowing down and tuning into ourselves. I was just messaging with a friend before this who lives across the country from me right now. It's planning for a major change, planning to move across the country. And he said he shared something with me about himself. And then I said, it sounds like that's something that's really useful to know about yourself. And then he responded with, that is the meaning of life, knowing oneself really deeply and then striving every day to be that person. And that was a few minutes ago. So I thought it was very pertinent for our conversation tonight. So here's some wisdom that we can draw upon. There's a word called Sankofa. It's a word from Ghana, and it means to retrieve. And the context for it is these sayings that go something like this: go back to the past and bring forward that which is useful. It is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. I learned about this from a colleague of mine who does work in the disability and access community. He's an American Sign Language interpreter, an amazing person who I've learned so much from. And he has helped me learn about the importance of asking questions. This is something that's really integral to my work as a coach. And it really can be powerful because when we ask questions, we can tap into what is going on. So instead of always offering answers, solutions, something that's really important for all of us to do, and for me as a coach, is to ask questions, open-ended questions, lots of open-ended questions, lots of how questions and what questions. So as we keep in mind this concept of Sankofa, let's keep going and think about how you measure progress. So I was recently reading a book. It's called The Gap and the Gain. Great book. I'm going to be adding it to my page of recommended reads very, very shortly, where I have a bunch of career and leadership books that I've found to be very useful. And in this book, they talk about how we measure our progress and how that makes a huge difference in terms of our quality of life and our ability to have an impact and to live joyously. And so they say, when it comes to measuring our progress and achievements, we have to turn around and look back to see the gain. Otherwise, we live in the gap, always striving for the ideal, constantly comparing ourselves to others, relying on external motivators, never feeling enough or content. And this graphic here explains it, where you have your starting point, and then you have all the progress that you've made to date. And then beyond that, you have the ideal, your image, your idea of the ideal. And so if we're constantly focusing on what we have yet to do, it can lead to a really frustrating, unfulfilling life. And so instead of that, if we live in the game, it is this world. It is full of possibility, learning, progress, psychological flexibility, opportunities, growth, gratitude, transformation. And so I was struck as I was reading this book by the relationship between what they were saying and Sankofa. And so that's why I share both of these with you right now, because they're essentially saying the same thing, which is that in order to move forward, it is incumbent upon us to look back, to respect and appreciate and understand where it is we are coming from. And so as we keep this idea of being in the gain in mind, I want to ask you, what were some of your wins in 2022? When you look back on the last year, what were some of your gains? These don't need to be monetary, but if you want them to be, they can be. They can have to do with your health. They can have to do with your career. They can have to do with relationships. And you might think, well, what does this have to do with my career if we're talking about relationships? Relationships have a lot to do with our careers. So things that might seem unrelated, oh, that doesn't have to do with my career, in fact, might have a lot to do with your career. What we find is that when people neglect relationships, It often makes their job search or their career pivot or their ideas of what's even possible in their life way harder, way more difficult, much blurrier. So, whether it directly has to do with your career or not, or you don't think it does, just open up your mind for a moment. Think about any kinds of wins that you experienced in 2022, any kinds of progress, any improvement, any learning, any growth, any successes, any accomplishments, and write a little list to yourself. And then in a moment, we'll come back together and you'll share in the chat one or two that you feel comfortable sharing with a group. We'll just put them in the chat. So take a moment. This is where the journal comes in. Write down anything that comes into your mind. Don't censor yourself. And then from that list, I'll invite you to add some into the chat. And I'll invite you to come back to writing that list after our time together here. And for now, go ahead and add one or two in the chat that you feel comfortable sharing with the group. And I'll read some aloud. Someone shared that they increased revenue by 25%, stopped drinking coffee, quit a job I hated, connected with nature. Working remotely full-time was challenging at first. So the win was to create better boundaries to improve work-life balance, and it worked. Selling my stake in a business I didn't have time for. I would offer a reframe for that, which is I didn't want to make time for, or I chose not to make time for, because we have time for the things that we find time for. Someone else shared, I gained a better understanding of my value add professionally. Found a great therapist. So you can see from this list of wins, it can be such a wide range. And sometimes we forget to sort of celebrate the things that we've already accomplished. So again, that notion of that gap and that gain, and where do we want to choose to live our lives? And then what kind of an impact is that going to have on the progress that we achieve and the joy that we have in our lives and how we impact others? So when we look at these examples, we have examples of learning, growth, stepping away from certain things, separating from some things that weren't serving us any longer, leaning into some things that we're excited about, whether it's more time in nature or other things. We have themes around taking care of ourselves. Wonderful. So thank you for sharing those. And let's move on to talking about developing your vision. So another concept that I learned about recently that I'm excited to share with you is called personal success criteria. So I'd like to invite you to take a moment and write down 3 bullet points to complete this sentence. I know I'm being successful when, and go ahead and share one of them in the chat once you come up with your list of 3. I know I'm being successful when. How do you know when you're being successful? Where does that knowledge come from? All right, the responses are starting to roll in. So please share if you feel comfortable doing so. So I know I'm being successful when I'm effective and have agency, one of you shared. And for those of you who aren't familiar with agency, what that's talking about typically is having the power, having the ability to make decisions, to act how you choose to act, right? It's like having will. You have the will to do things. Another one of you shared, my research is being used in policymaking. Someone else said, when I feel like I'm in flow and feeling confident. And for those of you who aren't familiar with flow, there are books and articles and all kinds of resources about flow. There's a famous Hungarian psychologist who wrote about flow and really studied it deeply. And it's that state that you get into when you are doing something you absolutely love. You could do it for hours. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's cooking, maybe it's gardening, so many different things, hiking, what have you. And it's the right level of difficult. You can do it, but it's challenging. And it's like time evaporates. And typically people feel very creative when they're in this state of flow. So one of the things we can be thinking about as you are thinking about how to create more clarity in your career is thinking about what are those times when I'm in flow, when I feel so creative and I could just keep going for hours. What are those things? And maybe you take a moment right now and jot down a couple ideas. When do you feel like you're in flow? What kinds of activities are you engaged in? Or what kinds of places are you? And going back to the personal success criteria, some of you shared when others ask for your opinion and your guidance, or when you're energized at the end of the day. I wonder if that was the same person who quit the coffee. Maybe they found some ways to be energized at the end of the day without relying on caffeine. And another one of you said when you get positive feedback for your work, and when I'm happy to go to work every day. And more of you are talking about energy, when I have more energy and desire to invest in my relationships. Thank you for sharing. So now I'm going to share with you a client success story so you can see some of these steps in action. So here we have Michael. He's a father, he's a professional, he's a passionate change maker, and he was at the same organization for over 10 years. So anybody who's been in an organization for a very long time may know that that can come with a lot of different emotions. There can be feelings of loyalty and closeness and connection and familiarity and comfort. And then there can also be all these other feelings, right? All these other feelings. Maybe there's resentment, maybe there's frustration, maybe there's feeling held back, so many different things. Stuck, maybe you're not growing enough. Okay. So Michael was feeling confused and unfulfilled. And we started working together, and it was about developing a vision, first of all. right? Because if you have no idea where you're trying to go, it's really hard to get there. And so clarifying his values, his interests, his skills, his priorities. This is what we worked on initially, using a variety of tools, both ones that I've collected from other sources and ones that I've developed. And from that, we built a really strong foundation of him having increased self-awareness. And there were a lot of, limiting beliefs. There were a lot of fears. There were a lot of things in terms of mindset that Michael needed to get beyond in order to move toward the vision that he was starting to create for himself. So at first, the vision is usually a little blurry. And then over time, through doing some work, through some self-assessments, through talking with a trusted partner, such as a coach and so forth, maybe doing some writing, right? We can increase our clarity, and all of a sudden, this vision goes from blurry to less blurry to slightly sharp to sharper to very sharp. Okay. So that's pretty much what it looks like. And so over time, he was able to really get past the fears that had been holding him back, and he was building his confidence. And so instead of all this, yeah, but I don't know if that will work because, and well, yeah, but I don't know because, and but what if, and all those kinds of things, he was able to get beyond that and really start to embrace this vision that he was developing for his life. And it was really exciting to be on this journey with him. So once he was believing the vision, he was able to start really enabling it to come to fruition. So what did that look like? Getting more comfortable being his authentic self, engaging with his network, right? So it went from, gee, I don't know how to reach out to people in my network I haven't talked to in a long time. Some of these people I haven't been in touch with in years. It feels kind of weird. I don't know, just write to them and just like ask them, like, do they know about a job that could be good for, like, how do I do that? What do I do? When, who, how, where, all these things, right? It went from that to like, oh yeah, I just had this great coffee with this old friend of mine who I hadn't talked to in a long time. And like, she was telling me about, and then there were all these stories like that. Okay. But that didn't happen on day one. It took a little bit of time to get there, and that's natural. And he really started to feel like how he could do this in a way where he could be his authentic self, which is so important because that's something I hear from people all the time. I want to be my authentic self. I don't want to pretend to be somebody else. I don't want to be fake. I don't want to be phony, right? I don't want to be putting on a presentation. And then through practicing and through developing his narrative, he was able to ace interviews. He went from having not really had to interview pretty much at all for years while he just kind of moved up within his organization to really learning how to interview effectively. And going into those interviews, feeling self-assured, accomplished, he was prepared. And then he accomplished his vision. He was delighted about the offer that he landed and confident, negotiating an excellent compensation package, which included a 30% pay bump and free tuition. Not bad. So that's a story that I love to share, and it's really emblematic of the work that we do. He was craving a new challenge and growth. He wasn't sure what and how and where and when he was going to, get this. And through a process, through him investing in himself, through him putting in the necessary time and reaching out and working with an accountability partner, he was able to make this come to life. So the ways that I support people, I help people make a great living while making a positive difference in the world. I partner with sustainability and social impact leaders to help them navigate career opportunities, both within their organizations and beyond. I do this through one-on-one coaching, through group coaching, and through workshops. And then I have a little bit of information there about my background. I've worked in sustainability, environmental protection, public policy, strategic communications, higher ed program development, and more, but I won't bore you with my whole story. You can read more about it on my website if you're so inclined. And I'm someone who loves to learn. So I studied psychology as an undergrad at UMass Amherst. I found myself working in state government and let's just say really not making a living wage for the market that I was in, and really feeling like I had this potential in me that I wanted to do something with. I really wanted to have impact. And I felt that a master's degree would help me do that. And I was also really interested in public policy. So I went and got a master's in public administration. And that led to a career pivot because I saw opportunities at my university for them to improve their environmental practices. And then I organized and advocated for them, for the university to do so. And it actually ended up resulting in a job, which I had not expected whatsoever. And so I started in that capacity, creating a recycling program part-time for the university while going to school at night. And then it expanded. It expanded into a full-time role. And then within a couple of years, I was able to encourage the university to expand the role to reflect the wide variety of things that I was actually working on, like energy, like green buildings, like purchasing, like waste reduction, like transportation, and so on and so on and so on. And so that was one of my career pivots. And I finished the master's degree. And being in higher education, people would look at me and say, okay, well, now that you finish your master's, what are you going to do now? And I was like, well, what do you mean? I have a master's degree. I'm good. They're like, oh, well, why don't you like keep going to school? I was like, oh, I don't know. Hadn't really thought about it. Okay. So then I started thinking about what might I be interested in, and ultimately decided that law school would be interesting and challenging. And since I was working at the university, I thought that going for heavily reduced price would be feasible, even if I didn't end up practicing law. And through law school, I was able to have a number of experiences that helped me gain experience in public policy and environmental issues, working on legislation with a state senator on climate adaptation and a number of other experiences, and ultimately went into environmental protection lobbying. And along the way, a lot of people came to me with interest in my career path, and that's how I got into coaching. And so this is the work that I do. I'm deeply passionate about it. I've obtained certifications in career coaching, life coaching, and leadership development. And I'm really excited to be able to share what I've been learning with folks who are looking to really lead fulfilling, impactful careers. Here's a bit about some of the organizations I'm affiliated with and the certifications I was mentioning, and some of the organizations I've led workshops and retreats for. And I see that our time is winding down. So in closing, I'd like to invite you to set up a quick conversation if you found our time tonight useful, if you'd like to continue the conversation. And that's really the pathway to doing work together. So we can get to know each other a bit more. You can share a little about your situation. And then if it makes sense after that initial quick chat, we can set up a longer conversation and see what options could be a good fit for you. So there's a QR code here. I'll also go ahead and put a link in the chat. All right, so that is there for you. So can I get a thumbs up if you grabbed the link? You grabbed the QR code and all that. Okay, excellent. It was a delight to have you all here tonight. Can't believe how quickly half an hour flies by when you're having fun. And I will mention that I am also launching a group coaching program, which is focused on mission-driven professionals who are seeking to make career pivots. It's going to be a 6-week program. We're going to get started in February, so in just a few weeks. And the registration is currently opened. There's an early bird price for the next few days, which will be good through the 15th. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check your email, because you probably have an email from me from about yesterday or the day before that mentions the group coaching program. And there are 5 slots left right now for that program. It's going to be a very small cohort. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with you through that, or through some one-on-one coaching if that feels like a good fit for you. So again, I hope you found our time useful, and I'm excited to keep in touch with all of you and hear about how things are going, what you're up to, and how I might be able to be of support. Thanks for coming, everyone.